The scorching sun hung motionless over the endless desert, casting long shadows behind every boot step. Dust swirled around the landing zone as the Black Hawk helicopter lifted off, its rotors slicing the air like a warning. Sergeant Rachel Monroe adjusted her tactical vest, eyes hidden behind dark shades, sweat carving silent trails down her dirt-streaked face. Beside her, Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes gave a short nod. Their German Shepherd partners, Max, Rex, and Shadow, stood poised, tongues out, scanning the horizon as if they sensed something beyond the mission briefing. This wasn't just training. There was a tension in the air that felt heavier than the heat. The U.S. military's elite K-9 tactical unit hadn't trained in this location for years. Forward Operating Base Caldwell, deep in the Mojave Desert, was a forgotten outpost, decommissioned, stripped of modern comfort, and rumored to hold secrets buried in sand and silence. For Rachel and Emily, this wasn't just another assignment. It was personal. Rachel's father had trained here in the late 80s before disappearing under classified circumstances. Reyes had her own ghosts, an old partner who never made it out of his last mission in these same dunes. Neither woman spoke of the past out loud, but they didn't need to. The desert remembered what the military tried to forget. Their mission was clear on paper: a 2-week survival and tactical training operation integrating human handlers and their K-9s under extreme conditions. But from the very first night, strange things began to unfold. The dogs, battle-hardened, disciplined, and calm, started behaving oddly. Max froze near an abandoned bunker. Rex refused to enter the mess hall. Shadow growled at the wind. It wasn't disobedience. It was warning. And the women, trained to trust their instincts and their dogs, started to feel the chill creeping beneath their discipline. Inside their barracks, bare, metallic, and echoing with every creak, Rachel found an old file jammed behind a heating duct. It was covered in dust and dated 1989. The folder had one word stamped in red: redacted. Inside, only a half-torn photo. A man in uniform, her father, standing with a dog, and someone who looked a lot like Reyes. But that was impossible. Emily hadn't even enlisted yet, or so she claimed. That night, sleep didn't come. Outside, the desert howled like it had a voice. Rachel lay awake, the photo clutched in her hand, questions growing louder than the silence around her. Who had been here before them? And what exactly were they being trained for? The dogs wouldn't rest. Neither would the past. And just before dawn, Shadow barked once. A sharp, urgent sound. Then silence. Reyes sat up. Something was moving outside. The desert at dawn was an eerie canvas of pale gold and long shadows. The heat hadn't yet arrived, but the tension was thick enough to taste. Rachel stepped outside the barracks, boots crunching softly over gravel. Shadow stood frozen near the fence, ears perked, tail stiff, eyes locked on the distant ridgeline. Nothing moved. No birds, no wind, just the silence, and a strange hum she almost couldn't hear, like something mechanical buried beneath the ground. Reyes joined her moments later, her expression sharp, alert. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. "Let's sweep the perimeter," she said quietly, reaching for Rex's leash. Rachel nodded, calling Max to heel. As the unit moved along the edge of the compound, the dogs remained tense, sniffing the air, reacting to scents only they could understand. It felt less like a military exercise and more like walking through the remains of a forgotten battlefield. And something about the way the sand shifted under their boots made Rachel's stomach twist. Halfway around the base, Max stopped cold. Nose to the ground, he began to dig frantically. Rachel dropped to one knee, brushing sand away with her hands. Within seconds, they uncovered something metallic, a piece of old, rusted equipment with an engraved serial number partially visible. Reyes crouched beside her, brushing off a faded emblem, a patch that matched the one in the photo Rachel had found. The same unit, same dogs, same location. "They were here," Rachel murmured. "This isn't just training, it's a reenactment." Inside the command tent later that morning, Reyes confronted their CO, Captain Miller. A cold man with clipped answers and a face like carved granite. He dismissed their findings as coincidence. "Desert's full of junk," he said, lighting a cigarette with hands that didn't shake, but should have. Rachel tried to push further, showing him the photo, asking about the man beside her father. Miller looked at it for a long second before folding it and handing it back. "You're not here to chase ghosts, Sergeant Monroe," he said. "Focus on the mission." But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling. She reviewed the photo again that night under her bunk's dim light. Reyes stared at it too. "I never told you this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I've been here before." Rachel looked up slowly. "How could you forget a place like this?" Reyes didn't answer. That night, none of the women spoke. The dogs paced restlessly. The generator buzzed, flickering the lights every few minutes. And just before midnight, the old radio in the corner crackled to life on its own. A voice came through, grainy, broken, male. "Echo 1. This is Delta. They're not supposed to be here." Rachel stared at the radio, her pulse rising with every crackle. The voice had faded, but the message lingered. "They're not supposed to be here." Shadow paced at the foot of her bunk, ears twitching at every sound, his body rigid like a coiled spring. Reyes sat in silence, eyes fixed on the dark corner where the radio Saturday. "It wasn't a glitch," she finally said. "That was a live transmission from somewhere nearby." At dawn, they searched the old comm station, guided by Max's nose and their own unease. The building was barely standing, walls cracked, roof sagging, wires exposed like veins. Rachel moved slowly, flashlight sweeping across dust-covered equipment. Then she saw it, a panel behind a rusted locker. Reyes helped her drag it aside, revealing a narrow trapdoor, hidden and long forgotten. No one had mentioned an underground level. No maps showed it. The dogs growled low as if sensing something deeper than just mold and decay. They opened it, and a wave of cold air rose like a breath held for decades. Descending the ladder, they entered a tunnel lined with faded military signage and broken lights. The air was thick with metal and memory. At the end of the corridor, they found a sealed steel door. On it, in black paint almost lost to time, were the words, "Observation Wing, K9 Unit Alpha." Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. She'd seen this exact door in a dream she never remembered having. Inside, they found what looked like a laboratory, old cages, computers, charts, and on one wall, dozens of photographs, black and white, all featuring handlers and dogs. Some of the dogs bore an eerie resemblance to Max and Shadow. "That's impossible," Reyes whispered. Rachel moved closer. Her father was in one of the photos again, but this time, he wasn't wearing his uniform. He was restrained, seated, eyes vacant. A subject, not a soldier. Back on the surface, Reyes demanded answers. They confronted Captain Miller again. This time, he looked pale, shaken. "It was a behavioral study," he admitted reluctantly. "Cold War era, testing deep psychological bonds between humans and K9s under extreme conditions. Some subjects didn't handle it well. It was shut down." Rachel clenched her jaw. "You brought us here to finish what they started." Miller didn't respond. He simply handed over a sealed envelope marked for Rachel Monroe only. Inside were handwritten pages, dated 1989, a letter from her father. She barely got past the first line before her breath caught. "If you're reading this, Rachel, they lied about everything." Rachel sat on her cot, the envelope trembling slightly in her hands. The yellowed pages inside smelled faintly of old leather and something more bitter. Maybe fear. Reyes stood silently by the door, watching her, the dogs resting but alert at their feet. Rachel unfolded the first sheet and began to read aloud, her voice dry, cracked by emotion and desert air. "They told us we were training the next generation of military K9 units. What they didn't say was that we were part of the experiment too. They paired us with dogs not just for combat. This was deeper, psychological, emotional. They wanted to test how far the bond could stretch. And what happened when it broke?" Rachel's throat tightened. Her father's handwriting was rushed, frantic near the end. He spoke of isolation drills, sensory deprivation, hallucinations, and the moment when one of the dogs turned on its handler after a week underground. The dogs weren't to blame, the letter continued. It was the design. We were all breaking. Rachel looked up, eyes meeting Reyes's. They were testing emotional trauma, not training. Reyes nodded slowly, lips pressed into a thin line. And they're doing it again. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a faded ID badge she hadn't shown before. On it, Corporal Emily Reyes, K-9 Observer Program, Classified Deployment, 2003. Rachel's heart stopped. You said you'd never been here. Reyes hesitated. I didn't remember, until I saw the bunker. It's like pieces came back. In flashes. The pieces fell into place like falling dominoes. Reyes wasn't just another soldier. She was a survivor of the original program. Her memories, buried under layers of trauma, were resurfacing now. And the dogs, they remembered too. Shadow had started reacting before any of them. Rachel looked at him, and for the first time, she wondered what the animals had endured, what they still carried. Outside, the wind began to pick up, sand swirling in small, angry spirals. The desert was shifting again. That night, Reyes shared more. The experiments had been shut down after 3 handlers disappeared, vanished without a trace. She had been rescued mid-program, memory fractured, never fully debriefed. I wasn't supposed to remember, she whispered, but the memories were returning, and so was the past. Just before lights out, Max began scratching at the north fence. Rachel followed, flashlight slicing through the darkness. In the sand, a fresh set of boot prints appeared, leading away from the base and into the dunes. They hadn't been there before, and they weren't alone. The moon cast a silver glow across the dunes, illuminating the footprints like breadcrumbs scattered across an ocean of sand. Rachel knelt beside them, running her fingers lightly over the impressions. They were recent, deep, deliberate military-issue boots. Someone had been here, and they were headed toward the old satellite relay station, about a mile out from the base. Reyes joined her moments later, eyes sharp, rifle slung across her shoulder. Whoever it is, they're not supposed to be here, she murmured. Rachel nodded. Let's find out why. They moved quickly but cautiously, the dogs leading the way with silent precision. Max and Shadow were locked into their tracking mode, ears forward, bodies low, tails rigid. The night was quiet, but it wasn't calm, the kind of silence that hides something just beneath it. As they neared the relay station, a half-buried structure of rusted steel and shattered panels came into view. Long abandoned, it shouldn't have been active, but a faint green light pulsed from inside. Reyes raised her hand to signal stop. You see that? Rachel nodded. It's powered. They approached slowly, weapons raised, dogs at the ready. Inside, the air was cooler, stale, tinged with the sharp scent of ozone. The source of the light was an old console, cracked, but blinking, and standing before it, back turned, was a man in a faded military jacket. Rachel's breath caught. He didn't move when they entered. Sir, Reyes called out, voice firm. No response. Rachel stepped closer, heart pounding. The man turned, and her world tilted. It was him, her father. Older, gaunt, eyes hollowed by years, but unmistakably him. Rachel froze, unable to speak. The room seemed to spin around her. Rachel, he said softly, as if he had been expecting her all along. Reyes lowered her weapon in shock. How? Rachel's voice broke. You're supposed to be dead. He stepped forward slowly, hands visible, eyes locked on hers. They told you that, but they lied. Just like they lied to me. The next moments passed in a blur. He explained, haltingly, painfully, that he had been part of the final phase of the original K-9 experiments. But when he tried to leak classified information, he was declared unstable and buried, figuratively and literally, inside this desert facility. I survived, he said, but not without cost. He looked at Shadow. That dog. Was bred from the same line we tested back then. Rachel's mind swirled. Her entire life had been shaped by a story that wasn't real. And now the truth was standing right in front of her. Alive and scarred. Behind them, the console let out a shrill tone. On the screen, intrusion detected, lockdown IN 5 o'clock minutes. They had triggered something, and now time was running out. The siren's piercing whine echoed through the relay station, bouncing off the rusted walls like a scream trapped in steel. Rachel's heart raced. The countdown flashed an angry red on the console. 4:52, 4:51, for 50. Her father was already moving. There's a fail-safe system underground, he shouted over the noise. If the sensors detect unauthorized presence, it seals the compound and initiates a purge protocol. Reyes went pale. A purge? Like gas or detonation? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Shadow and Max barked sharply, sensing the danger. We have to move, Rachel said, grabbing her father's arm. You're coming with us. But he hesitated. If I leave now, everything I've hidden down here, all the evidence, will be destroyed. And they'll erase every trace. Again. Reyes checked the console. Can you stop it? He shook his head. Not from here. But there might be another way. An override panel. South tunnel. But it hasn't worked in decades. They didn't have decades, they had minutes. The group sprinted down the crumbling hallway, their flashlights slicing through thick dust and tangled wires. The dogs led confidently, as if they'd been down this path before. Maybe they had, maybe something in their blood remembered. As they reached the tunnel's end, they found a sealed control box half buried in the wall. Rachel's father pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires and an old keypad. I need time, he muttered. 3:12, 3:11. Rachel turned to Reyes. Cover him. I'll watch the corridor. Reyes nodded, positioning herself behind a rusted pipe. Max stayed by Rachel's side, tail low but eyes scanning. Then footsteps, from deep within the tunnel. Not theirs, not echoes. Someone or something was approaching. Reyes tensed. We're not alone down here. From the shadows emerged two figures in desert camo, faces obscured by tactical masks. Unmarked, silent, armed. You need to leave, one of them said, voice distorted through a voice modulator. This facility is compromised. It's over. Rachel stepped forward. He's my father. He was left here, forgotten. We're not leaving him behind. The second figure raised his weapon slightly. Then none of you will leave. Suddenly, the dogs lunged forward, not to attack, but to stand between the soldiers and the team. Growling, protective, unmoving. Rachel's father shouted, "Now!" and slammed the palm of his hand onto a blinking panel inside the box. Sparks flew. The console screen behind them flickered. Lockdown aborted. System override accepted. The masked men didn't move. They simply turned and walked back into the darkness without another word, vanishing like ghosts. Rachel collapsed to her knees, shaking, heart pounding. Her father exhaled deeply, but they all knew. This was far from over. The desert was silent again as they emerged from the underground structure, dawn just beginning to stretch across the horizon. Rachel's boots felt heavier now, as if every step carried the weight of buried truths and shifting loyalties. Her father limped beside her, worn down by years of isolation. Reyes scanned the dunes constantly, fingers tight around her weapon. The two masked soldiers hadn't followed, but that didn't mean they were safe. Back at base, the mood had shifted. The personnel were different, fewer soldiers, more suits. Men in black polo shirts with no insignias walked the halls with clipboards, avoiding eye contact. A black van now sat parked near the mess hall, engine still warm. They know he's alive, Reyes whispered. Rachel nodded. And now they're cleaning up. The feeling of being watched was constant, crawling up the back of her neck. Shadow paced. Max whined softly. Even the dogs could feel the tension in the air. In the privacy of the barracks, Rachel finally sat across from her father, her voice tight. Why didn't you ever try to contact me? He looked down. I did. I wrote letters for years. I sent them. Then one day they stopped going through. My handler told me you'd moved, changed names. I didn't know what was real anymore. Eventually, I gave up. Rachel's jaw clenched. They made me believe you were dead. Her father looked at her with tired eyes. They wanted you to forget, because they were grooming you to follow the same path. Reyes entered the room carrying a small black case she'd recovered from the tunnel. You need to see this, she said. Inside were dozens of data drives and physical files, documents outlining the entire K-9 psychological program. Names, photos, results, failures. One file stood out. Monroe, Rachel, candidate potential assessment. Rachel stared at it in disbelief. They were watching me. Since the academy? Her father nodded slowly. You were part of the next generation. Chosen. Trained to handle what others couldn't. Before they could speak further, an alert blared across the base. Attention. Unauthorized personnel detected. The same voice repeated on a loop. Rachel stood. They're not done with us. They're shutting this down completely. Reyes loaded her weapon. If they're coming, we hold the line. We expose the truth. The doors rattled. Boots pounded the dirt outside. Max and Shadow stood at the threshold, growling low, ready to defend their handlers to the end. And then, the first flashbang hit the ground. The flashbang exploded in a blinding burst, shaking the barracks with a concussive roar. Rachel hit the ground, her ears ringing, vision blurred. Max barked furiously, positioning himself over her as if to shield her from what came next. Outside, shouts filled the air, short, cold commands in clipped tones. Whoever was attacking wasn't standard military. They moved like ghosts, quick, tactical, trained to erase, not rescue. Reyes recovered first. She pulled Rachel to her feet, yanked her toward the back exit, and threw a smoke canister behind them. The dogs followed without hesitation. Rachel's father limped beside them, clutching a file case like it held his soul. They don't want prisoners, he gasped. They want silence. Reyes led them to the supply depot, one of the few structures with reinforced walls. They barricaded the doors with crates of gear and weapons. Inside, the air was tense, every breath tight with urgency. We can't hold out long, Reyes said, loading her rifle. But if we transmit this, she pointed to the data drive, we can blow it all open. Media, military watchdogs, everything. Rachel looked to her father. He nodded. There's an old uplink tower on the ridge. We used it for satellite relays. Still might be live. Rachel grabbed her radio. Then we move, but we do it with cover. Her voice cracked as she looked at Max and Shadow. You ready, boys? The dogs didn't flinch. They stood tall, as if they knew the weight of the mission. The team broke out under cover of smoke and gunfire. Shadow lunged ahead, knocking a soldier off balance, giving Reyes time to sprint forward. Rachel followed with Max at her side, dodging behind old barriers, breathing hard through the dust and adrenaline. A bullet ricocheted off the sand inches from her boot. Behind her, her father fell. Go! He shouted. Finish it! Rachel froze, but Reyes grabbed her arm. We have to go! The decision tore through her like a blade. She turned, her father disappearing behind the smoke, then followed Reyes up the ridge. The tower came into view, skeletal and shaking in the wind. Reyes slammed the drive into the terminal, fingers flying across cracked keys. Signal's weak, but it's pushing through, she said. They'll know. Someone will know. Then the gunfire stopped, and silence took its place. Rachel looked back down the hill. Max whined low, ears back. Shadow stood perfectly still, staring at the smoke-filled base. Something had changed. And then, from the radio, just one word. Run. The single word, run, echoed through the static-filled radio like a final warning. Rachel's blood ran cold. Reyes jerked her head toward the ridge. They've activated burn protocol, she muttered. They're going to erase everything, including us. The satellite tower groaned under the rising wind, the transmission still uploading in fragments. How much longer? Rachel asked. Reyes glanced at the screen. 60%. Maybe 90 seconds. Below them, the base was vanishing into a cloud of smoke and fire, targeted explosions detonating in sequence. Controlled. Intentional. Max and Shadow stayed close, heads low, bodies tense. Rachel could feel their energy vibrating through the soles of her boots. These weren't just dogs anymore, they were survivors, witnesses, soldiers. Her father's last transmission had bought them this window of time, but Rachel knew. If they didn't get the evidence out, all of this would be buried again. Reyes tightened her jaw. When it hits 100, we go. Straight north. Avoid the road. The earth shook beneath them as another explosion rocked the desert. A mushroom of sand and fire rose where the command center once stood. The heat reached them even on the ridge. Rachel's eyes burned. Her heart screamed for her father, but she knew. He had stayed behind to buy them a chance. The silence after each blast was more deafening than the explosion itself. Reyes muttered almost to herself, "This was never training. It was a cover-up." Upload complete. The screen blinked. A final message flashed. Transmission successful. Media outlets engaged. Rachel stared at it, breath caught in her chest. "It's out," she whispered. "They can't stop it now." Reyes nodded. "Then we move." They bolted from the tower just as another shockwave knocked the top section loose. It crumbled behind them, smashing into the ground with a sound that felt final. They ran through the desert like fugitives, like ghosts being chased by fire. Max and Shadow stayed perfectly in sync, clearing the path, alert to every movement. Behind them, the desert was being rewritten by flame and silence. Everything, documents, structures, bodies, was being wiped from existence. But not the truth. Not this time. After nearly an hour of running, they reached a rocky outcrop where they could rest. Rachel collapsed against a boulder, lungs burning, body trembling. Reyes slumped beside her, pulling a satellite phone from her vest. "If they jam this too," she said, "we're on our own." Rachel didn't answer. She was staring at Max, his eyes locked on the desert behind them, unblinking. And then, from the haze, a figure emerged, walking straight toward them. The figure moved slowly through the dust, steps steady, purposeful. Rachel and Reyes raised their weapons instinctively, breath caught in their throats. But Max didn't growl. Shadow didn't move. They stood still, watching, recognizing. That was the only reason Rachel didn't fire. As the figure came into focus, her heart twisted in disbelief. It was her father, limping, covered in ash and blood, but alive. He had made it out. She ran to him, catching him just as his knees gave out. "How?" she whispered, tears mixing with sweat and sand. "You were still inside." He coughed, voice hoarse. "I found an old escape tunnel. One they didn't think anyone remembered. I had to make sure you got out. That the story didn't die with me." Rachel helped him sit down, her hands trembling as she wiped dirt from his face. "It didn't. We got it out. Everyone's going to know what they did." Reyes joined them, radio still in hand. Multiple transmissions are bouncing across independent media outlets. Anonymous accounts. Leaks. The story's spreading. She looked toward the horizon. "But someone's going to try and stop it." Her father nodded weakly. "They will, but they'll be too late. The system they built to hide the truth just exposed itself." He looked at Max and Shadow. "And the dogs? They're living proof. The bond they wanted to weaponize became the thing that protected us all." Silence fell for a moment. The kind of silence that comes after something breaks, and something new begins. The three of them sat in the heat, bruised and broken, but still breathing. The desert had taken so much from each of them. Time, family, truth. But it had also given them clarity. Rachel reached into her pack and pulled out the old photo, the one that started it all. She looked at her father, then at Reyes. "We need to make this official. Testimony, records, public hearings." Her father nodded. "No more shadows." Hours later, 2 military helicopters appeared on the horizon. But these weren't black ops. They were rescue units. diverted after the media storm ignited a full-scale investigation. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt the weight begin to lift. As the choppers landed, Max and Shadow stood side by side, eyes forward. Guardians, survivors, family. Rachel turned to Reyes, voice calm but resolute. "We finish what they started. On our terms." Reyes smiled faintly. "Together." And as the dust from the helicopters rose around them, blurring the scars of the past, the three soldiers, two human, two canine, walked forward, side by side. They were no longer just part of a program. They were the ones who ended it.